Today we're going to talk about commercial leasing and how to represent the tenant in a commercial lease environment. The tenant's needs. Of course, the tenant wants the best space, best location, and best price every single time. And these are the questions we're going to go through to ask the tenant. And of course, a tenant is no different than any other client or customer that you might be working with. You have to ask if they've worked with another realtor. You should ask if they've signed anything in writing with another realtor. Have they put an offer in with another realtor? Those three questions are the key questions that you should always be asking any client or customer that you are working with every single time to make sure you don't get in trouble and stepping on another realtor's toes. So of course you want to make sure of this. So we're going to talk about location, how many square feet, signage and parking, the price, the use, and then a free rent or fixturing period. So location, I get this all the time from agents that they say, I'm working with a customer, they're looking for a warehouse and somewhere in the GTA. It's a little bit too broad, you guys. You're going to drive yourself absolutely bonkers unless you can somehow narrow down the search pattern a little bit. You need to kind of, is it at least down to Newmarket or, York region is huge. Do they need to be close to a highway? Do they need street signage or frontage? It's important to find out what they are doing. If they're going to be in a restaurant, then stop looking in the middle of a field in Markham. You're going to have some high traffic area to help you out, that kind of thing. And, whether it's a ground floor, a plaza, high traffic, is it simply a lawyer's office? It can be on the 6th floor of a building because they just simply don't care, or a professional office such as a bookkeeper or an accountant or something like that. You really need to drill down and talk to the agents. Call me regularly and say, this client is driving me nuts. They're looking for a warehouse somewhere in the GTA. Oh my goodness. Don't be shy to tell the customer or client, if you have them signed up already, to ask the client or customer, what are you doing? What's the use? Where? Why? How? When? Those kind of questions. Square footage. This is one of the great ways to be able to help you search out a property for a client. Square footage. What is the range? In the Trev searches, you can put in just about any range that you want for square footage, and it really helps to talk to the client. I had a person the other day who said they were talking to a dentist, and a dentist wanted a place, and they couldn't find a place. And I said, well, how many square feet are they looking for? And the agent said they had no idea. And I said, well, it's time to go back to the dentist, because the dentist knows how many square feet they need. And find out. A dentist, is it one chair? Is it two chairs? Is it three chairs? Is it a a teeth cleaner person? That just went right out of my mind. That kind of thing. So location, square feet, I think we talked about it enough, but I just want to really hammer down on the square footage. The square footage part is so important. I was talking about a dentist. Well, a dentist in dental school gets told how many square feet. You guys shouldn't have to guess at what your client needs for square footage. And so make sure you talk to them about it. If somebody wants a woodworking shop, well, how many square feet do they need? If they say, oh, I don't know, how are you going to do your job? It's just about impossible to do your job without knowing the square footage. Really, really, really important question to ask. Oh, and the good news, folks, is my chat button has shown up. And so if you have a chat question, don't hesitate to write it in the chat. I can see it now. Signage. It's another really important question. Back to the lawyer on the 4th floor of a building, an office building. Does he need signage? Maybe, maybe not. What about the street pylon? You know, the sign that's on the sidewalk or just off the sidewalk that's facing the traffic. Does the tenant get to have a spot on that street pylon? And the tenant might look at the street pylon and see the sign of the property that they are now going to lease because the previous tenants have left, and think that, oh, we're going to be able to be on that street pylon. Well, not necessarily. There might be a wait list for that street pylon. There's many plazas out there that, you know, have maybe 30, 40 stores, but the street pylon only has 20 spaces on it. And so if the street pylon is important, you want to talk to the tenant about that. What about different signs, shapes, and sizes? Just because there's an existing sign, it does not necessarily mean that any other size sign or shape of sign can go onto that. Many plazas, as an example, have rules, covenants, if you want to call them, about sign sizes and colors of signs, that kind of thing. You want to ask this question as well. Parking, just as important. How many spaces, exclusive spaces? Technically here in the Richmond Hill office, and I know a lot of you have been in the Richmond Hill office, against the side of our buildings, there's all sorts of signs that says for the exclusive use of Century 21 only. Well, as lots of you know, when the karate place upstairs comes at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, all the people dropping off their kid use those spaces. So how exclusive is exclusive? This is really important. You know, a handicap parking. How about underground employee only parking? I was involved in a place a few months ago where the employees needed their own parking. And thankfully at the back of the plaza, there were 3 designated employee parking spots that were written into the lease that were for the sole and singular use of the employees. So these are all questions that you should be asking your clients. So let me check the chat button here. Yes, Ed brings up a very good point. Ed says, when discussing square footage, it's very important to discuss usable area versus rentable area, especially in plazas and condos. And so the rentable area can be a proportional part of hallways and washrooms, lobbies, that kind of thing, as opposed to the usable area. So you do want to make sure that when you're doing that kind of a lease, that you have that together there on that kind of a question. Thanks, Ed. Price. There are basic ways that listings agents advertise the property: monthly rent or a price per square foot. The monthly rent is pretty straightforward, and we'll talk about what could be included in rent in just a minute. A price per square foot usually expressed as a dollar amount per year. You need to divide by 12 months to determine the monthly rate. For example, $20 a square foot, 2,000 square foot, that's going to equal $333,033 per month. And so that's the way you read that. Please remember that HST is always in addition to the monthly rent. I've actually had agents call me and say, well, it was not advertised that HST is in addition to the monthly rent. Well, guess what? HST is always in addition to the monthly rent in a commercial unit. I've never run into one yet that's not. And for the client, because in this case that I said where the agent called and the tenant was freaking out about HST, well, HST on a commercial unit can be claimed back as an input tax credit, just the same way as you guys can claim, you know, the HST on a gas bill or a phone bill as an input tax credit. Tenants can do the same thing. There are a variety of different price categories for rent. There's gross, modified, net, double net, triple net, or a percentage rent lease. I don't think any of you will ever get involved, or it would be very, very, very rare that you would get involved in a percentage rent lease. It may happen, but it probably will not. A percentage lease is that, for example, Yorkdale Mall. and they don't deal with real estate agents in Yorkdale Mall, just to let you know. But Yorkdale Mall has a base rent, and then they have a percentage of sales that come into the equation as well. Percentage rent lease, you know, when you're walking through a mall and you have the little kiosk that's selling sunglasses, as an example, or a common one is cell phone cases, as an example. Those are usually percentage rent leases that a percentage of sales is going to the mall or property management company or ownership, whatever you want to call it, as rent. And usually a percentage rent lease, the landlords are not dealing with realtors for those. The rest of them in the GTA are usually gross or net. And why are they gross or net? Is because that is what the MLS system allows us to choose as whether it's a gross or net. The MLS system does not allow a listing agent to put in modified gross lease, double net, triple net. Okay, it allows gross or net. Okay, so that takes me to the next slide. That a gross lease, by definition, means there's a rent charge that includes everything else, including taxes, maintenance, insurance, and utilities. That is the definition of a gross lease. A net lease is the rental amount, and the tenant must pay one additional fee, usually taxes. However, the MLS does not allow net, or net leases as an option. Okay. Most listing agents do not know the above. You must always check with the listing agent to be sure of what is or what is not included in the rental fee. As an example, you'll see MLS listings that say $20 per square foot gross lease. Okay? When it says something like that, there shouldn't be anything else, you guys. It should be $20 a square foot. Okay? But then on the MLS data sheet, you will see TMI. Well, TMI should not be in a gross lease. All right, but you'll see this all the time because people don't know what to select out there. There's lots of residential agents and some commercial agents who definitely don't know what they're doing. When you see a net lease, it should actually be net. Okay? I know this is maybe a little bit confusing, but a net means that it's usually only taxes in addition. It should be net, but we do not have that choice in the MLS data system, okay? So the bottom line is when you are thinking that a property is suitable for your tenant, it's time to pick up the phone and talk to the listing agent and find out what is or what is not included in the rent price, okay? Really important. A lot of them will put down a gross lease thinking that it includes utilities, but then have TMI. A lot of people will put down a net lease and there'll be zero for taxes or zero for TMI. And it should be a gross lease. It's just really a mess out there when it comes to commercial leases on the MLS data sheet. Do be aware that you should be calling the listing agent and finding out what is included and what is not included in these prices. Okay, it's really important, you guys. It's a real mess out there for sure. The other part I just want to mention TMI is, and I want to take it back to the HST subject, is, and I just had a phone call yesterday about this actually, and hopefully if you're on, the lady will know who I'm talking about. I won't mention your name, but I got a phone call yesterday about whether HST is applicable to TMI. And so I have seen leases that says TMI plus HST on TMI. Well, if it's in the lease, it's really clear that HST is on TMI. Once again, the HST on TMI would be an input tax credit, okay? Technically, it should not. For example, what is TMI? TMI is taxes, maintenance, and insurance. Property taxes, you guys, do not have HST attached to them, right? We all pay property taxes in our houses. There's no HST on property taxes, not for residential, not for commercial. Maintenance would have HST added to it for the snow plow, for the services provided by the property management company, whatever would have it. Insurance is only partial HST. It doesn't have full HST on insurance. It's only partial. So in fact, it should be taxes don't have HST, maintenance has all HST, insurance has partial HST. But in the bottom line, does it really, really matter to the tenant? And the answer is no, unless the tenant has a real cash flow problem, because the tenant can claim back HST on TMI as an input tax credit. Does anybody have any questions about this so far? I know it's a little confusing, but just don't trust what's on the MLS data sheet, you guys. It is just, people don't know what they're doing. And you know, there's lots of agents, and there's lots of agents here at Century 21 Heritage Group that 99% of the time they sell a residential property. And then their friend says, well, can you list my commercial unit for me? Or can you find me a commercial unit? For goodness sake, you guys, phone the listing agent, phone your manager, let us help decipher what it says so that you can pass on the correct information to your tenant, client, or customer. So, TMI. Most commercial rentals have the base rent plus TMI. That's pretty normal. There's not too many gross leases out there, you guys. TMI, once again, is like the rent. It's expressed as $1 per square foot. Some landlords also charge a service fee as percentage of the TMI. Now, this is the beauty. I have seen the service fee in a lease as high as 20% of the TMI. So your taxes, maintenance, and insurance is $3,000. Well, then if you have a 20% add-on, all of a sudden you have $3,600 as your TMI. Be aware of service fees as a percentage of the TMI, okay? Some properties in the TMI include a line that says the tenant also has to pay their proportionate share if any of the HVAC equipment breaks down. So just imagine, in taxes, maintenance, and insurance in the lease, it says what the tenant is responsible for. It's responsible for the proportionate share of tax, proportionate share of maintenance, proportionate share of insurance, which is all fair based on square footage of the overall unit and your proportionate share, your tenant's proportionate share. But then what happens if the air conditioning unit in the plaza breaks down? Oh my goodness. There's many, many leases out there, you guys, that says it's the tenant's responsibility to pay their proportionate share if it breaks down. Be careful. Many smaller plazas have this. Many smaller buildings have this kind of statement in it. It can get really expensive. Just imagine if the total square footage of the plaza is, just make this up, 1,000 square feet, and your guy has 100 square feet of that, and the furnace and air conditioning unit breaks down, your tenant has to pay 10% of the cost of replacing that. That's going to get really, really, really expensive. And so do be very careful about lines like this in the landlord's lease, which is why, and we'll get to clauses that you should include, but you should always have a lawyer's review of the lease, okay, to make sure that everything is good to go. So just 2 tips there about percentage fees and HVAC equipment breakdowns. Zoning. You must always ensure that the intended use is permitted. You must have a condition in the office specific for zoning, a lawyer's condition, or a due diligence clause for zoning. Please, and this, we've run into this over and over and over, do not assume that the zoning for a bakery allows a restaurant, okay? It could be 2 totally different things. Don't just assume that because there was just an office in a walk-up building that it can now be a school. Two totally different zonings. Just don't think that it might be, okay? This is really a problem for many agents. You just can't assume anything. And also, in a management allow, for example, 2 dental practices in the same plaza. The zoning might be allowed, but does the management allow it? Has the first dental office signed an exclusivity agreement with the property management company that will stop anybody else wanting to be a dentist from going into that plaza? That's often the case, by the way. There's not too many plazas where you see 2 dental offices in the same plaza, okay? And often, of course, in a plaza, it might be a condo, in which case you should always have a status certificate review, no matter what, okay? Last but not least, legal non-conforming zoning may not always pass successfully to a new tenant. This is in particular cases where you have a mechanic shop in call it a residential area, that, there's been a guy that's had his shop there 30 years ago, and he's always had the mechanic shop, and all around him now are houses, okay? And the zoning all around him is residential, and he has a legal non-conforming use, okay? So it doesn't conform to the zoning that is around him, but it's still legal, okay? When somebody wants to rent, or in fact buy that property, the legal non-conforming may not always pass to a new tenant back to the zoning. You've got to get this checked out by a condition, okay? Whether a lawyer does it or your tenant does it themselves, who's responsible for determining the zoning of a property? And it is not you, the real estate agent, okay? It is not your guy's responsibility to get it, all right? To get what the zoning, you direct your tenant to get the zoning? Can you go with your tenant to a municipal office and ask to speak to the zoning examiner to see what the story is? Can you do some homework on the internet to try to find the zoning? And God bless you if you can find zoning on the internet that's going to make any sense at all, because you're looking for zoning, of course, which is not so hard to find a map, but to find permitted uses of that zoning is a whole different story. Be careful, you guys. At the end of the day, it is your tenant's responsibility to sign off on the zoning. Just don't say, oh, no, it's a bakery, it's good for a restaurant, that kind of a thing. Oh my goodness, you're going to get yourself in big trouble, okay? Work together with your tenant is what I'm suggesting. Let the tenant do it himself is even better. Get the tenant's lawyer to do it themselves is even better, okay? But of course, you want to provide service and help, but you're not the ones that should be telling your tenant the zoning allows whatever zoning it is looking for. Free rent or fixturing. Many tenants would like to have time to complete leasehold improvements on the property to enable the business to operate. It's very fair, and most landlords know this, okay, that this is probably coming at them. It can be simple as installing a front counter to adding walls, floorings, and washrooms, painting. Oh my goodness, it can go, basically, we had one here a year or two ago that it was a condo that the condo was basically concrete walls on the inside, concrete floor. Well, there was some major leasehold improvements that had to be done, okay? Those leasehold improvements can be done by the tenant. Those leasehold improvements can be done by the landlord. Those leasehold improvements could be shared between the landlord and the tenant. Usually in the smaller units, it's done by the tenant. It's as simple as that. The landlord doesn't care if you're adding a front counter, okay? Adding a washroom is a bit of a different story, okay? You've got all sorts of plumbing and stuff. Landlords, if you get into some major leasehold improvements, are going to want to see plans on what you are doing. I've seen plans drawn up on the back of a napkin, and submitted as Schedule C to the agreement to lease so that everybody sees what the tenant is going to do. I've seen engineering drawings of, we're moving this wall, we're doing this, we're adding this, we're doing that. And so anything, it's up to the landlord if they want to see a drawing or not. Some will insist on it, some won't. Depends on the size of if you were in a plaza, as you can imagine, as I mentioned, Yorkdale Mall, they don't work with real estate agents anyways. But you can imagine if a tenant in Yorkdale Mall wanted to do leasehold improvements, that there would be significant drawings that would have to be submitted along with the offer to lease. Okay. So landlords very often allow a free rent period, 1, 2, 3 months to accommodate this. Many landlords will also have in the lease that if you, for example, have a rent-free period of 3 months to do your leasehold improvements, but you open for business in 2 months, you don't get that 3rd month for free. You're running your shop and open for business. So it's not a way to get around paying rent in the first few months that you're occupying the property. If the leasehold improvements are done in 1 month and you had 3 months free, the landlord's going to want the 2 and 3rd months rent as well, okay? That's called base rent, okay? So the base rent may be forgiven, but TMI and utilities would be paid for by the tenant most of the time. I have seen a few examples where actually, and it usually goes into a fixturing period, where the tenant is in there, can work it for 3 months and doesn't pay a thing. But that is usually fairly rare. I have seen it, but it's pretty rare. Usually the landlord wants TMI and utilities to be paid in the rent-free period. Okay, so base rent will be forgiven, but TMI and utilities will be paid for by the tenant. Okay. Commencement date of the lease may be after the fixturing period or rent-free period. So if you rent a place for January 1st and have it for free until April 1st, you've got 3 months free. You won't get commissions until after the commencement date. Oh, sorry about the O in front of O date. Sorry about that. The commencement date. You won't get commissions until after the commencement date. We get those calls, and the ladies in the back office get the call. Well, my client started the lease on January 1st, but the commencement date was April 1st. They want to know why they don't have their commissions at the beginning of January. Well, you don't get your commissions until what's called the commencement date. Okay, so be clear on that. Okay. Paperwork. So, Form 816, working with a realtor. Form 816. So, working with a realtor, you can see here that it's different from the residential working with a realtor. It's working with a commercial realtor. The rest of it is pretty much the same, except it says commercial, 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 commercial everywhere. Okay. But if you're working with a tenant to find a place, you do not use the normal working with a realtor. You work with this one. You work with this working with a realtor. Okay. Next one. There is a tenant agreement for commercial. Okay. Mandate for lease. This is not Form 300, the buyer representation agreement or lease agreement. This is a specific commercial mandate for lease, tenant representation agreement. So of course you'd have the working with the realtor done first. You'd have this Form 546 done second, okay? And it goes on. It's pretty much the same as anything else. It's got responsibility of the tenants here. You know, all offers within 90 days. You've got the commission amount here. It's pretty much the same kind of thing, just the wording's just a little bit differently. Okay. It does say, of course, here in number 4, same as in Form 300, except it's paragraph 3. The tenant acknowledges that the brokerage has provided the tenant with written information explaining agency relationships, which is, of course, the working with the realtor brochure. Here's your typical agreement to lease. There are two agreements to lease that are used in the industry. One is the short form, and the next one that we look at, which is Form 510, is the long form. The short form is preferable in most cases, okay? I would try to keep using the commercial short form in most cases. The commercial short form works very, very, very well for a lease that has a fixed rental period for a fixed period of time. So in other words, if it's $20 a square foot for the next 3 years, you can see the term of the lease would be for 3 years, commencing on the day of. And remember this commencement date here, commencing date. Remember we talked that this could be, the commencing date could be the 1st of April, but the rent-free period starts on the 1st of January, and this is when you're going to get paid your commission here is at the 1st of April. The rental amount per year payable monthly in advance, plus HST, okay? Deposit and prepaid rent. A common mistake that we see, deposit and prepaid rent, this is the same, payable to the listing brokerage in the amount of Canadian dollars to be applied against the first and last month's rent and HST. You have to put in the amount including HST here, okay? So there's no question that your tenant is not surprised that there's HST. Any additional terms to do in here? TMI paid, TMI to be paid at $14 a square foot. Schedules A and B, if you need that. Irrevocable, it's all kind of the same kind of thing. And you'll see here that that's the end of the short lease. There is no Schedule A attached to the short lease. If you need one, you need to add it yourself, okay? Or the front desk will add it, whatever you like, okay? Because sometimes the really simple ones, they just put in here additional terms. 3 exclusive parking spots, signage to be the same size, shape, and color of the existing sign, washrooms to be shared equally, whatever, can just be put in here. End of story on a really simple lease. I want to talk about irrevocability for a minute here. As a residential agent, and I think a lot of you are, you're used to, for some crazy reason, putting down 11:59 p.m. As the irrevocable time, 11:50 p.m. Don't do that, okay? Commercial agents work, till 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They're not dealing with anything that's going past that time, okay? The landlord's not interested in dealing with your offer at 11 o'clock at night. They're working 9 to 5 like normal people do, not real estate agents. And don't do anything on the weekends. Landlords aren't working on the weekends. Property management companies are not working on the weekends. And usually there's some time. You don't have to put in, if it was an offer putting in today, you don't have to put in, 6 o'clock tonight. There's usually some time to do this. So I'd make the irrevocable, 2 or 3 days is probably fairly standard for these kind of things. Okay. This is Form 510. This is the long form. And this one is pretty much only used when you have, for example, a 3 or 4 or 5 year lease, and every year the price changes. So you have a fixed term lease. Term of lease shall be for a term of, this says months, of 60 months commencing on whatever, and they can have an additional terms of not less than so many months. And how are we going to do the rent here? Okay, so the rent would be from January 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022 per annum, et cetera, per month. And then January 23 to December 31st, 2023, and so on and so on and so forth. So really the only time the agreement to lease in the long form is used is when you have a fixed term that every year, every month sometimes if it's really short, but generally every year, the monthly rate changes every year for a fixed term, okay? These rates, and the same as the rates in Form 511, do not include TMI. It's just the base rent that we're talking about here. Deposit and prepaid rent, right? Same thing against whatever the first and last month's rent and HST, okay? Sometimes landlords would like to have a security deposit as opposed to residential leases. In a residential lease where the only security deposit that a landlord can ask for is the last month's rent, as I hope all of you know. In a commercial lease, a landlord can ask for, well, just about anything, but first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, okay? And in which case we have seen a negotiable payable to in the amount of, and it shows this huge amount here, and then it says including security deposit to be applied against the first and last month's rent plus HST. You can also put a security deposit line in Schedule A as well, okay? So just remember this part here plus HST. We see it all the time that they're putting in the first and last month's rent and they forget about HST because people are used to doing residential HST. And then you can check what's included and what's not included, schedules, irrevocability, notices, landlord or tenant's work. This can be a little bit easier if there's a lot of leasehold improvements that you can start to put down here about schedules and what's going to be included. Landlord's work, tenant's work, or NA if there's nothing to be done. Signage, what can be done for signage, this kind of thing, okay? Parking, what can be done for parking? We talked about those things. But this one here, as opposed to this, which is the short lease, which doesn't have this, has these additional terms here, okay? I'm telling you, most of them are on the short form, okay? And you'd add a Schedule A if needed instead of this one where it gets all lengthy and a little more complicated. But this one is used to, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with either of them. I did have, and I don't know if Christopher Yip is with us today, but I did have Christopher Yip tell me, who does do a lot of commercial leases, tell me that all sorts of commercial agents won't even accept Form 510. They won't even look at it. They just say it's too much, it's too crazy. And so I do see it once in a while, but I see the short form lease way more often than that. So I'm suggesting that you use Form 511 more so than 510, especially if it's relatively simple. Like I say, the only time 510 is used is if you have a fixed term lease and the yearly amount is changing. It gets a little bit wordy in Schedule A to put that in 511. It can be done, but then I think you should be using Form 510. And so those are the forms. Now I didn't have Form 320. The Confirmation of Cooperation and Representation, Form 320, is the same as residential, okay, for Confirmation of Cooperation and Representation. We have seen, I want to point out to everybody that we have seen in some leases that it very explicitly states in the lease who is representing who and who's getting paid commission or not getting paid commission. It's in the lease and everybody signs off on it. So there has been a few cases where there's not been a Form 320, but it has to be explicit in the lease. Please remember that when working with a tenant that uses an incorporated company, that you must see the articles of incorporation, okay? You have to be sure that the person who is signing for the lease has the ability to bind the corporation. This is no different than residential if you're running into numbered companies, no different than if you're in commercial, where commercial are buying or selling properties. It same applies to leases. if you're working with an incorporated company, whether you're on the selling side or the tenant side, you must have articles of incorporation to ensure yourself that there's no fraud going on in that incorporation, that the person is signing has the right to bind the corporation. Okay. Clauses and conditions. Now you might, for those of you who are interested in doing this, maybe you want to take a screenshot of this. If you want to take your cameras out and take a picture. So LeaseCom 5, this is maybe the best one, the lawyer's approval of the lease terms for the tenant. Same as a lawyer's approval for reviewing a status certificate in a residential deal. Condition for the lawyer's approval. Okay, it's really important. I think we've talked about zoning conditions. I think we've talked about that enough as LeaseCom 7. A really great clause to put in. LeaseCom 9. Alterations and improvements. That's you know, the LeaseCom 9 is a clause that says that the tenant can do minor alterations and improvements without the landlord's approval, but any major improvements shall have to get landlord's approval that shall not be unreasonably withheld. Okay, so it's a pretty good one to put in if there's kind of the minor improvements, leasehold improvements that needs to be done. Assigning or subleasing. This is a good one to protect your tenant. Okay, your tenant might sign a 5-year lease, and at the end of 3 years find they can't make a go of it. Well, does the tenant have the right to assign or sublease this? Okay, will allow the tenant to be able to assign or sublease the demised premises to somebody else. Okay. LeaseCom 22, early occupancy, net free rent. Okay, this is a good one. If you want to have net free, can they occupy it for 2 or 3 months prior to the commencement date? Okay, this is the one you need. How many months? And it says in LeaseCom 22, by the way, that the tenant is still responsible for TMI and utilities. It actually doesn't state that exactly. It says that base rent is forgiven, but all other costs are still the tenant's responsibility. Insurance, the tenant to obtain. Can the tenant get insurance for what they want to do? Okay. For example, if you're doing a welding shop, does the building have the correct fire code and things that an insurance company is going to be happy enough? Just imagine the power that has to go into electric power, that has to go into a welding shop. Can you get insurance for this? Is it all properly done? Is it ESA inspected? All that good stuff. Now, if it's just a normal, opening a little cafe or something like that, hopefully the tenant can obtain insurance, but hey, this is your job to make sure that the tenant is aware that they need to get insurance on this place. And as a matter of fact, much like residential properties, the landlord's going to insist on seeing an insurance policy, including liability and contents, just like a residential lease for a commercial property. Next one's the net lease. So the net lease it explains exactly what's included in the lease. So there's no question of what's going on in this lease. Okay. LeaseCom 39 and 47, I think we've talked about that as well. Parking and signs, I think we've kind of done this pretty good. The LeaseCom 50, the use of common areas, and back to one of Ed's original points between usable and rentable areas, this covers that to a large degree. And then LeaseCom 52 is a workmanlike manner, that any leasehold improvements that are done have to be done in a workmanlike manner. In other words, the tenant just can't go in there and slap in a washroom. It has to be done properly, okay? That kind of thing. So those are some other clauses. Right now, in LeaseCom, in your web forms, I think we're coming close to the end of it, but I think there's a total of 60 odd clauses in LeaseCom in web forms. And we've looked at 10 of them or 11 of them. There's many clauses that you can use in lease comm. Also, I want to remind everybody that residential clauses can be used in commercial clauses, okay? You do have to be a little bit careful. For example, maybe you need to have an inspection done of the property for some reason, for the tenant's use. Well, there's not really a great lease comm inspection clause. There is one, but it's not great. And I know a lot of agents just simply use the residential clause and they change buyer to tenant and they change seller to landlord. It's easy to do, you know, so you can use residential clauses and simply change buyers and sellers to tenants and landlords. These are interchangeable clauses. So you get, if you start thinking of all the residential clauses, you're up to 600 all clauses that you can use in your web forms. But these are the most common ones to use.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like our video, please hit the like button, the subscribe, and even the little bell to get notifications, just so you can stay in touch and watch more of these great videos.